Okay, cool. There we go. Now we can start our recording. If you are not cool with being recorded, you can turn your camera off or just check out our recording of this event later. We usually post it in the meetup. But let me introduce our speaker tonight. Her name is Christine Fair, and she's going to be talking to us about escaping the bad design echo chamber in 4 easy steps. So Christine is a practicing UX designer. She's worked with a variety of clients, from small startups at the Harvard Innovation Labs all the way to large corporations like CVS. Her projects have scaled the digital media landscape from web, mobile to native apps. She prefers to operate with a lean UX methodology embedded with engineering and development, other stakeholders, and product team members to bridge the gap between user needs and business goals. So she's also an educator. First was a graduate teaching assistant in the Harvard program where she received her master's degree. And then after a few terms began developing and teaching her own courses, first for New England College and now at Northeastern University. So super excited to have Christine here with us tonight. And without further ado, let's let her share screen and take it away. And as we go, y'all feel free to answer ask questions in the chat, and I can pause us to get some answers.
If they want to answer the questions as well, that would be great, would make my job a lot easier. Thanks so much for that wonderful introduction. And thanks also to the UX and ATX team for putting this event together tonight. I know it's not easy to organize these. One reason I'm super excited to be here is because I used to live in Austin. I expatriated to the Boston area a little over 10 years ago, but I'm a 6th-generation Texan and I loved living in Austin. I'm wearing my Dirty Martin sweatshirt tonight. So that was actually one of my first jobs when I lived in Austin. So if anybody hangs out at the Drag and wants a burger. I also want to thank all of you for just showing up tonight. I know after spending all day looking at a screen, it's really a great commitment to your craft to show back up on Zoom tonight. So you should all kind of give yourself a round of applause as well. I'm going to try to fit a lot into our sort of time that we have together tonight. And I'm going to drop a FigJam board in the chat right now. You don't really have to do anything in there right now, but just kind of make sure that you can get in. I'll be referring to it a couple of times during the talk tonight. And just, you can kind of make sure you can get in or throw a comment in the chat if you can't get in, and we'll see if we can help you out there. Okay. So a quick overview of what I'll cover tonight. First, we will identify the sort of bad design echo chamber, talk about what is bad design, what the echo chamber is, why it's bad, and then we'll walk through 4 questions that we can ask and have our teams ask to escape the bad design echo chamber. So it's really, asking these 4 questions is taking the 4 steps to escape the bad design echo chamber. So it's pretty simple, even though it doesn't sound like that. Before we get started, I think we should get on the same page with what we mean when we use terms like good design and bad design. If any brave volunteers want to throw in the chat what they think bad design is, you can put some comments in there. Maybe it's like when the director of some department you hardly ever work with asks you to make your design pop. I think we've all been there. So maybe like that's bad design. But if you have an idea of what bad design is, you can put it in the chat. So this is the example that I love to use when I am teaching. So this is part of the Uncomfortable collection, which is a collection of deliberately inconvenient everyday objects by Athens-based architect Katerina Camprani. And so I really love this, and you should check out this website, theuncomfortable.com, which has them all on there. But like, what's the issue with these rain boots, right? And here's another piece of that collection. And what's wrong with the watering can, right? So I think we would all say these are bad design. And bad design is bad because it doesn't serve the users, right? Maybe it's inaccessible. Maybe it breaks the user's trust. Maybe it goes against mental models or best practices. Maybe it just follows dark patterns. And maybe it even excludes certain groups of people. So there's lots of ways that design can be bad. Like this watering can would not allow a gardener to water their plants. The rain boots are not going to keep your feet dry, right? So they wouldn't serve the users, and they wouldn't allow users to achieve their goals. So that's one way that we can define bad design. Now, obviously, those examples are things that were intentionally designed to be bad, right? Maybe we can learn from them, maybe they make us uncomfortable, but what about when we're actively trying to do good design, which hopefully that's what we're all trying to do, right? Now, with design work, I sometimes like to say wrong answers only, because even when we get it 90% right, people are going to point out the 10% that we missed, right? When we get it completely wrong, people are going to point it out. But the tiniest thing that you miss, it could be problematic. People are going to talk about it. Maybe they're going to make memes about it, right? So what is really good design, and what does it mean to get it right? So a good design to me, I think, is anything that improves on what already existed, right? Hopefully, most of us are working somewhere that we can practice iterative design so that we have opportunities to realize the areas where we can improve, right? We see the trouble that people are having with our products, and then we make it better the next time around. So I think that's good design, right? So sometimes good design is really just better design, as in better than what it was before. So then why am I showing you a ketchup bottle, right? Because the designers iterated on that bottle and they came up with something better than it, something that was a bit more usable and a bit more effective. So this whole talk isn't about how to define good design or bad design. So for tonight, let's just say that good design is inclusive, accessible, and builds trust. And it's our goal to, do good design in our work. So now maybe we're kind of on the same page about good design and bad design. So does everyone know what an echo chamber is, right? In Wikipedia, they say that an echo chamber is news media and social media becoming an environment where participants encounter beliefs that reinforce their own beliefs through repetition inside a closed system and insulated from rebuttal. So me paraphrasing Wikipedia, what they're really saying there is that echo chambers are a way of sort of social proofing your thoughts without really validating them. Echo chambers are situations or circumstances where our feelings or ideas, or in our case tonight, our designs, are reinforced with no research and no checks and balances. So for our purposes tonight, think of the internet as the closed system of the echo chamber, and the designs that exist there. And that could be UI patterns, the way folks implement copy, right? Poor inconsistent typography, right? All of those are things that exist in this echo chamber. So it's a creative echo chamber. And because all of this already exists in there, why can this echo chamber become problematic, right? So basically, we've all seen bad design, right? I just showed you several examples of bad design. So we know that bad design is out there. And when we use bad designs to get ideas to create new designs, we're really perpetuating more of this bad design, right? And so I think that's why we're all here tonight, to learn how to do better design. But for me, what I've seen is that a lot of UX designers today, maybe we're new to the field, or maybe we have too many projects, or we're constantly shifting between different platforms. Maybe we have really short timelines. And so sometimes we look online to quickly inform our design choices, or we're just going to do what we see that a competitor did because we think it fits our own use case. And I think as the UX profession grows and demands on our teams increase, the tendency to use these kind of shortcuts of using designs that we found on the internet without validating them, without checking them for their potential success with our specific users, becomes this self-perpetuating problem. And so that's what I call the bad design echo chamber. I think this echo chamber reflects the problems with social proofing designs rather than applying our skills that we've learned. And I think we do all see examples of it. And to be clear, I'm not saying it's bad to look online for design inspiration, but I'm just saying it's bad to repeat that design without doing a little bit of work. And the work will be the 4 steps that we talked through tonight of how to escape the bad design echo chamber. Okay, have I lost anyone? Is everyone with me? We're good. We know what good design is, bad design, the echo chamber. We're going to get out of it. So before I kind of share this example that I'm going to use in our talk tonight, everyone can go ahead and jump in that FigJam board if you haven't already. And there's a section on there with 4 poll questions that I just kind of want to get to know a little bit more about who's here in the audience tonight. So if you guys want to kind of answer those, and then just underneath that, there's 3 different navigations. And there's a bunch of stickers over on the side. And what I'd like you to do is just drag a sticker onto what you think is the best navigation. So, I also want you to know I didn't personally design any of those navigations. So if you don't worry about hurting my feelings if you don't vote for the one that I designed, okay? So we'll give folks like a minute or two to do that. And does anybody have any questions before we jump in? It looks like everybody's getting in the board or not complaining that they can't. So that's great. Okay. So I was kind of saying bad design can be bad design because it doesn't serve your users or your business, right? Remember the open-toed rain boots? Like that's probably not going to be a big seller in the springtime, right? It's going to be pretty ineffective. So I'm kind of looking at the polls here, seeing how many results we have coming in. Okay. So it looks like a lot of you think that maybe you have done bad design before. And I think that that's a really good sign because that means that you're kind of recognizing what is good design and what is bad design. For my part, I would say the last time I did bad design work was probably yesterday. That's only because I took a half day today. Otherwise, it might well have been today. But the bad design work I did yesterday was I agreed to ship something that had some sort of inaccessible buttons on it. And of course, the PM's telling me that we just don't have time and it's just going to be for the beta version. So like, we're going to come back and fix it, right? And it's always that promise of, but like the beta version, what is that? Like it could be next month or it could be never, right? So I contributed some bad design to the bad design echo chamber just yesterday. And looking at the poll, that's a pretty good mix of answers there. So for the rest of the talk tonight, we're going to talk about a real life example that I encountered. And I actually didn't design this one. I inherited this one. And I'm not really going to reveal what company this was that I was freelancing for at the time, but I've seen something similar to this at almost every organization that I've worked with. Okay, so this was years ago. I call it the bad navigation. I was working for an e-commerce company that had a very small product team, a very small development team, and they had this one freelance designer. It was me. And so before I got there, and to be fair, before most of that team got there, the old team had given the website navigation an overhaul. And how do you think they decided on this new design for the navigation? Well, a few stakeholders got together and they looked around on the internet and they found a cool navigation. It popped, right? It was cool. It looked cool. It had some cool animation. It had a cool hover effect. And they were able to put in some fun branding elements. So you guys ready to see this navigation? I mean, it's amazing, right? And I'm sorry, it's on like 5 more of my slides tonight. So here it is. I unbranded this to kind of be anonymous, but here you have it, an e-commerce company's top level navigation, right? So this fancy, cool navigation was recycled from somewhere else on the internet, and it didn't serve the business. It didn't serve the users. And if you look at it like this, out of context of like seeing products, right? You might not even guess that this is an e-commerce company, right? You don't really have a sense of like what we sold, right? You also couldn't tab through this navigation. So there was no accessibility taken into consideration. So this is the navigation left for our little team. Now it does have the really cool, neat branding thing and the hover animation, but here's a business that's trying to sell products to people on the internet and people coming on the internet trying to buy those products on the website, but they couldn't really easily navigate to any product category from this main page. And it turns out if people can't find your products on your website, it's hard to sell them those. So this is an example of the major problem with the bad design echo chamber, that you find something on the internet, you build it and you put it back out on the internet. It's both a product of and a contributor to the bad design echo chamber. All right, now we're gonna have a little moment of truth here. We're going to go back and kind of look at the poll and see what navigation got the most vote. Okay, 3's getting a lot of votes there, 1 and 3. Okay. So I think that, this was kind of like a trick question in a way, right? Because, like, how are you deciding to vote for one of these over the other, right? Do you know what we're selling? Do you know who our users are? Is our users like 20 something? Are they 50 something? Are they women? Are they men? Are they a mix of people, right? So what were your reasons for voting and how you casted your vote? And did any of you see someone that you knew dragging their little dot to a certain section? You thought, oh, I know they're a good designer. I'm going to put my dot where their dot is, right? So again, it's kind of unfair, but I just created this to kind of show the baseline premise of what we're talking about tonight. Like I found all of those navigations. Those are just like Figma, like templates, right? And I just kind of made them all generic. And I really don't know if any of them are good or bad, because the real only right answer is that it depends, right? My mentor that I studied under for years when getting my grad degree was a huge fan of it depends. And it was kind of like a mantra in all of our classes, right? And I teach it to my students today. And I say it all the time at work. I have a kind of special flavor of it that my team knows, but I say, well, and when I say, well, my team knows that, I'm saying like, it depends. And maybe we need to step back and think, like, what does it depend on? It depends on our users, it depends on our goals, and it depends on the desired outcome. Okay, so back to this. I told you guys you're going to have to see it again. You have to verify that this is a good design, or at least check to make sure that it's not bad, right? Nobody verified that this was good. They didn't even check that it wasn't bad. There were no checks and balances, just bouncing around the bad design echo chamber. So then how do you make sure it's good? That's what we're here to talk about. And we're going to quickly go through these steps that you can take to escape the bad design echo chamber. Each step is a question that you and your team can ask to verify that you've created a better or maybe even a good design. So let's get started with our first question. So the first thing you're going to ask, is the design really aligned with your users' goals? And to start that off, I think you kind of have to ask who your users are, right? Because sometimes we're not always designing for our users, right? So ask who your users are. And there's a lot of ways to ask who they are, and even to see if your design is aligned with their goals. Maybe you do user testing, right? And this is something else that I've seen a lot in teaching as much as I've seen in the workplace. But every semester I have my students do a small usability test. And every single semester, there's one designer who has created some really cool UI, something, flashy with a cool animation, or maybe they've created like a whole new feature for their project. And they're so excited to test it because they had this great idea and they know it's awesome. And every year, one of those students that created this cool thing does this user testing, and they realize that it doesn't matter how cool their design is or how much they like their design. If their design doesn't work for their specific users, then it's not a good design, right? So it's great as a teacher to see people learning this, but how many folks out there are working with someone who kind of does this thing, right? Who regularly suggests something that's just like over-designed, uncalled for, or out of scope, right? And, designing for our users is something that we just always need to keep in mind. And I think it's just important to make sure that like everyone on our team is kind of focused on that as well. So who are the users of your specific product? You can't always do usability testing when you have limited resources. So maybe you can find other lower lift ways to check and see if your new design is aligned with your actual users. So as I was saying, that like bad navigation, there was definitely no user testing. I don't think there was like a focus group done, right? But the simplest way to align with your users is a good user story. So this is a user story format that I prefer to use and that I think is the best because it really makes us have the empathy with our users, but also an assured outcome of the goal. So, if we were going to have that for our e-commerce company, right, maybe we would wind up with something like this, right? As a type of user, so as a person shopping on this website, I want something. So I want to like find the products that I might want so that, some goal, I can find the best product for me. Now, this is a very vague and I would say bad user story. It's just not specific enough, but I'm trying to make this a little bit generic to keep things anonymous. But still, even with this really vague user story, I don't think that you can do it with this navigation, right? And I think if you were using this user story to try to validate this design, you would see that it's bad, right? So let's go back to some of those other kind of like users I clicked through, right? So maybe this guy is a hiker. So he might have a user story like that. And this guy, is he a janitor, right? So think of these user stories to make sure that your design is aligned with your users' goals. Now, in the bad design echo chamber, when we social proof our designs, we're using designs created for someone else to accomplish a different goal. and then we're plugging them in to try to solve our users' problems. And that's why it generally doesn't work, right? The hiker doesn't want the same thing as the janitor. They're different people and they have different goals. Where I'm working now at Backlot Cars, our users tend to be over 40. They tend to be male, and they tend to have been involved in used car sales for a while, right? So one thing that I know that means to me is that they might not use technology in the same way I do, right? You are not your user. And so you don't want to make like huge or broad generalizations, but some of my users still use Internet Explorer. So that kind of tells me a certain, you know, like I can make a few design decisions based on that. So, you know, I generally try to keep things very basic, super discoverable. It's kind of like almost like a Craigslist or something, mental model of usability. It's just like plain and simple, right? Keep everything right in front of you, right? So I was recently working on our mobile app, and some of the development team and a really cool designer on my team wanted to add a swipe interaction to this new feature, right? So like Reddit has this swipe interaction, so you can just kind of scroll through posts, right? You can like scroll through the ads there. So when my team kind of mentioned this to me, what did I say? I said, well, it depends, right? And I wanted to kind of validate that we shouldn't really build it, which was my assumption, but I also wanted them to see that I was willing to validate it in case we really should build it, right? So when I asked, it turns out they had built something similar over 2 years ago, and it's in the app and it's live and no one uses it, right? So it's not super discoverable. So let's still have the benefit of the doubt. And so I took some prototypes out into the field. I did a little ad hoc research, which meant, you know, showing up at used car lots around the Boston area. And I had my Figma prototype loaded on my phone, and I handed it to these guys and said, hey, you know, like, check this out and see if you can, you know, accomplish a couple tasks. When some of them did finally like discover the swipe functionality to scroll through the posts, they didn't like it, and they strongly preferred tapping. So like the Venn diagram of like used car salesmen to Reddit users is not a circle, and I need to know which ones I'm designing for so that I can stay in the right circle, right? Okay, that's a little tangent, but the point is, ask who your users are. And so here's our checklist for step 1. Ask who your users are. You can write user stories. You can build up a research practice. You can do ad hoc user research. I do like hallway testing, guerrilla user research, like I just described, but find some way to build empathy with your users into your checklist before you hand off your designs to the development team. So, okay, that's the next step, right? Is going to be handing this off to development. So I think the second question you need to ask is, can your team implement this? So this is step 2 in escaping the bad design echo chamber. So think about who your team is, right? We've got the development team, probably a product management team, other designers, right? What can they do? What are their abilities to implement the design, right? And this is something I think that we tend to overlook when we're in a rush or when we're overloaded with work, right? We want to go over and do our design and then come back and say like, here it is, go build it, right? Or when we have some cool animation that we think is really great, right? Or maybe a swipe functionality. So I want to be clear here that the capabilities I'm referring to aren't just the skills of the team, right? Anyone on my development team could have built the swipe functionality, right? It wouldn't have been a good use of their time. But the capabilities I'm referring to are also like, what's your tech stack? How much tech debt do you have? What's the capacity for the team? What's the bandwidth? When does this have to be done by, right? Like, what's the whole scope that this needs to fit into? And there's lots of moving pieces on a team. So the more transparency that we have, the better for the whole team. So now I'm going to kind of go into this a little bit more, but I really want us to think about this because software development, and that's what we're doing as designers, is a team sport, right? Unicorns don't exist, despite what you've heard, right? So we're going to think about this football team, right? If the running back has a great game and the defensive line does not, how did that work out for the team? Did the running back win the game and the rest of the team lost? Because I don't think that's how football works, right? What if the kicker had a great game and the quarterback didn't? What's the team's result, right? And again, it's just not about ability, right? It's about how the whole team is coming together to solve this problem in this game that you're playing today, right? So each individual player's work impacts the overall team's outcome. And the overall team's outcome is the only one that matters. The screen that your users will see and click on, then try to navigate through to achieve their goals, that's the whole team's outcome. So, you can't really just like go off and design something and pitch it to development and win the game, because we're playing a team sport. So of course, my example of the bad navigation, of course, I was asked to fix this. And fortunately, I was working with this really great product manager, and she had some great data points about how if we could really funnel people to a product page quickly, they were twice as likely to buy a product. If they ever navigated to a single product page, twice as likely to buy a product. So that's cool. I love designing with data. So like I'm pretty happy with this. And so I went off to design the new navigation. Now, I did exactly what I just told you not to do. I was thinking, oh, this needs to be a really slick navigation. They love that cool UI on this old one that's broken, so I don't want to lose that. And so I went off by myself for like almost a week trying to keep these awesome branding elements, and making it just like really slick. And I came up with this like navigation, and I was like, okay, this is actually for our users, so this is going to be great. So I shared it with marketing. I shared it to the cool PM. I even shared it with the C-suite. Everyone's on board, right? This is going to be the new navigation. It's going to be great. And then I show it to the development team, right? The development team was literally 5 people. So they were like, yeah, Christine, we would have to spend a whole 2-week sprint to build that. We have so much technical debt. We just we have other things that we have to solve. We have, like other trains coming down the tracks, and we don't have 2 weeks for your navigation. Like, you're cool, but no, like, we're not going to do that. And so, the navigation that I had designed was actually still bad because my team didn't have the capability or the capacity to build it in the scope that we had for this project. So what I had designed was really nothing. I just wasted a week of time because my team couldn't implement that design. So now what? Still isn't working for users, right? So we had a 30-minute brainstorming session, and me and the developers and the product manager, and we came up with a compromise. We came up with a compromise that we could build in 2 hours. Now, if I had initially brought in the developers to my, to my process, they probably would have built the navigation before we even had this brainstorming session and this meeting, right? We could have, we could have already sold more product, but here we were. So we came up with a new navigation. You guys are ready to see it? I hope everyone's ready to see this. All right, the big reveal. Wow, right? Look at that. It doesn't even do anything. There's absolutely no navigation or no animation, right? And you know what? No one cared, right? Because it actually worked for our users. So this is like the, unbranded now, but this is the new navigation that we actually built. I think we might have had a cart icon instead of it saying a cart. But when asking if your team can implement the design, a really great way to be aware of your team's capabilities is to show your designs early and often, right? Let product development and any other stakeholders you have see what you're working on. So I really like to give people a window into my process and progress all of the time, get some feedback. Maybe you can find a way to compromise with developers or with products a little bit to help your team find success, right? Some ways I've done this are holding bi-weekly design office hours. In the before times when I was in a physical space, I had it on the calendar as optional for everyone, and I would go hang out in a conference room for 45 minutes twice a week. And people would just stop by and say, like, what are you working on? Or I have a question about this thing, or I have an idea, could we do this thing, right? In the remote work world, how I've done this is by like messaging the team on Slack and saying, hey, it's design happy hour, here's a Zoom link. And someone always shows up. And again, it's the same thing. They just want to ask questions. They want to see what I'm working on, or they have an idea about how we could make something better, something that we did before. So show your design early and often. Collaborate with your team. Make sure that you're really understanding the full capacity of the team to build the design. And remember that, it really is teamwork, and you can't win without the whole team winning. Okay. So you check the design for your users, and it's really for your users. Your team is capable and maybe even interested in building this design. So now we need to know if it's accessible. A big part of me wants this to be like the first step, but it's really hard to check for accessibility when you don't even know what you're designing yet. But it's just really so important to me. So hopefully folks are like somewhat familiar with WCAG, double and triple A ratings, or have some like vague sense of what that is. So remember our quote from earlier, right? Bad design is inaccessible. And bad design costs money, right? Like, why does it cost money? Again, those like rain boots aren't going to be big sellers, right? If people can't find your product on the website, they can't buy it, right? So here we are, an e-commerce company, and our site is failing a lot of accessibility standards. And so if you think about this statistic, that almost 20% of Americans have some sort of disability, right? So if you're e-commerce, people are coming to your website, but it's not accessible. So you're just saying that 1 in 5 people, sorry, tough luck, we might not be able to sell you something on our website, right? So that's a lot of sales. And maybe it's not like all 20% really can't use the website at all, but I don't think that's a risk you want to take. I don't think that's a risk that your like head of product wants you to take either. So, I think you should just like, accessibility is really important. I'm going to share here, there's a link on the bottom of this slide about accessibility, and this illustration comes from that article. And I really love how clearly it shows in this illustration that a disability can be something permanent, temporary, or situational. And the article does a great job of showing how those disabilities can impact our users. And it's just a lot of things that you might not think about. But if you do have time, just go and check out that article. I know there's tons of resources available online if your team doesn't have an accessibility expert, but please remember that every design must pass this test. I know there's also a lot of sort of automated tools on the market that you can use to kind of check for accessibility. Those are great. Use them if you can. They're going to miss some things. So one of the simpler ways to sort of provide yourself with a baseline framework for accessibility without reviewing like 250 plus pages of WCAG documentation when you just want to like update a form field is the POUR framework. I don't know how many people have heard of this or are familiar with this. But I'm going to do POUR framework in maybe 30 seconds or less. Don't time me. Perceivable. So this means that users have to understand the information being presented. It can't be invisible to any of their senses. So this is things like ARIA text, image captions, right? Operable. Your user interface components and navigation must be operable. So users have to be able to use the interface, and it can't require interaction that they can't perform. So what if I don't have a mouse? Can I do this, right? Tab through navigation, things like that. Understandable. Understandable is information, and the UI must be understandable. So users have to be able to comprehend it. So think about like reading levels, and they must be able to understand or intuit how to use the interface, right? And then finally, robust. Robust is really talking about the content of your page. It has to be robust enough to be understood by a wide variety of users with a wide variety of abilities, including users who are accessing your website with those assistive technologies, right? So this is the POUR framework. It's awesome. There's a million articles written on this. I'm not an accessibility expert, but it's important to me. Now, another thing that you can do, in addition to just kind of like making yourself familiar with these things, kind of using the POUR framework, is you can use a design kit that has accessibility just like baked into your UI elements. Not every library on the internet has that has been built with accessibility in mind, but you can check the accessibility ratings when you are picking a new design library. If you're building your own design library, awesome. I love doing that. It's so fun. But if you are doing that, make it really clear to everyone on your team that you want your design library to include accessibility. You can use Storybook to kind of collaborate with your developers and make sure that they have a version of the design library that also has all of those accessible elements just baked into every UI component, and it will always be consistent and accessible. Okay, so as I mentioned in my current role, with the types of users that I have, people generally a little bit older, what do you think we focus on in terms of accessibility, right? A big deal for us is font size and touch target size. We recently redesigned a report that users access multiple times a day, like all over our platform, right? And we had the new report designed. We thought it looked really cool. And the internal team actually pushed back and said, like, the font's too big, there's too much space, and so I have to scroll too much to like read the whole report. Well, our users love it, right? No pushback from the users. They really like it. So circling back to our example navigation, don't worry, I'm not going to show it again. When the dev team and I found the compromise for that navigation, the like super plain one, it was part of a library of plugins that included accessible elements for screen readers and for tab through, right? We lost that fancy UI animation, but again, no one cared because it worked, right? And our team could build it. It was accessible. It was meant for our users, right? So we had made it to step 3 of escaping the bad design echo chamber. So now our last question we're going to ask tonight is, how will you measure success for this design, right? I think it's important to make sure you're clear with your success metrics, right? So how can you do this? It's our old friend, the really simple user story, right? With this format of the user story, the goal is baked right in there, and that goal can be your measure of success with this design, right? So if you use this user story format, even if you use that super vague one I was talking about with like, as a person trying to shop on this website, I want to find products so that I can buy them. Horrible user story. But even if you use that with the new navigation we designed, I think you would see that we would have success with that new navigation, right? So maybe a simple user story is the way for you to start trying to measure success with your design. Now, hopefully you can do a little bit better than that. As I mentioned with the bad navigation example, I was working with a really awesome PM, and she had already given me some data. And so we had a really clear success metric. We wanted to increase engagement with the navigation and increase associated product page views, right? Because we're an e-commerce company and we had data that every product page view increased our likelihood of sales. So what do you think our goal was, right? It's e-commerce. We're selling product, right? So by encouraging these click-throughs, we're encouraging more sales. And the compromise design that I came up with our development team was still able to drive that engagement and pump up our numbers, right? So make sure that you focus on what matters to your users. It's probably never going to be that cool UI animation, but you can still find a way to, achieve success, even with something that's, less fancy in design. So you can do it on the small scale with a user story, or you can do it with these like data metrics and usage metrics like we did with the navigation. But there's another way that I think you can do this. And I really like thinking about this, especially, on a role where I have a little bit more of a strategic position. And that's to think more globally about your product and what its overall success would mean to your users, right? So think about the really big picture and then apply it to them with the piece of work that you have in front of you, right? So if you're selling something on an e-commerce website, your user, their goal is not to use your website, right? Their goal is not to find your product, right? Their goal is to purchase the thing as quickly and painlessly as possible so they can like have the thing arrive in their hands and then they can do whatever it was that they wanted the thing for, right? So sometimes you can measure success by thinking, how can you improve the life of your user, right? So if you're this janitor, how can you make his life easier, right? So like maybe he can subscribe to have, a mop shipped to him once every 3 months because that's how often he needs a new mop, right? So things like that are really making your user's day and their life better are ways that you can, include those as a success metric for your design. Okay, so here's the user stories, data metrics, or big picture of making your user's life easier. Those are all great ways that you can measure success. Okay, so we have reviewed what the bad design echo chamber is, why it's a problem, and these 4 questions that you can ask to escape the echo chamber, right? Now, before we totally wrap up here, y'all remember our Fig Jam board over there from before. So we can take a quick second and go back in there. If people want, you can change your vote on the navigation now. If you want to vote for a different one at this point in time, feel free to, vote for a different navigation. My guess is we'll have a lot of votes for D this time around. Now, if I have this board set up correctly, in a few more hours, none of us will have edit capability anymore, but everyone can still view it. So I added a couple of sections over on the right, and one of them is just a little networking area. So if you're looking for a job, you can kind of pull a sticky note up there and put your LinkedIn or your portfolio on it. If you're hiring for a role, you can pull a sticky up there and share that information with people. Or if you're just here because you want to connect, you're not looking, you're not hiring, there's a little section for that as well. So you can kind of check that out over in the Jamboard. And then just below that, I have like a little cheat sheet of how to escape the bad design echo chamber. Okay, so let's wrap this up so we can maybe get everyone off of Zoom. We can all go look at a different screen. I think the great part about these 4 questions is that by asking them, you really know that your design is good for your users, can be built by your team, it's accessible, and it's going to allow you and your users to achieve success. Jared Spool is a UX design leader. He lives here in the Boston area. He's amazing. You should check him out. But he once tweeted, "Good judgment comes from experience. Experience comes from bad judgments." So to me, he's kind of saying that it seems like if we can learn from other designers' bad judgments, we can gain experience to make better choices of our own, right? And sometimes maybe we're the designers that made the bad judgments before, and that's okay. So it's okay to make bad designs sometimes, because that's how we're going to learn to make better design and even how to make good designs. So you're just far less likely to make bad designs if you're using these 4 easy steps and asking these 4 questions with each project that you have. Okay, that's what I have for tonight in How to Escape the Bad Design Echo Chamber. Thanks so much for your time and for listening. And thanks again to the UX and ATX folks for hosting tonight. I wish I was actually in Austin tonight. I am happy to take any questions from folks. You can put them in the chat. And Casey, I'll turn it over to you to help.
Yeah, absolutely. Y'all can feel free to come off mute if you want to ask a question aloud or type it in the chat. I was going to ask you something that I saw in the chat earlier. It was something that kind of crossed my mind too. Where would you say research fits into all of this? Because kind of as we were talking about that navigation, somebody mentioned like a tree test or card sorting. So can you talk a little bit about kind of where you would place research in those steps? Yeah.
Sure. I do think that's kind of in step 1, of asking who your users are, right? For me, I try to kind of do iterative research as I'm doing iterative design, right? I'm fortunate enough that where I work now, in the last few places I've worked, we've had a sort of advisory board of people that are users that we can kind of call up randomly and ask for feedback on things. Sometimes they're not really the users that we want to talk to, but it's some kind of feedback, right? We also do surveys. We do regular kind of competitive analysis. And so I think all of those are good things, but it's again, the kind of idea of we're a team. And if the guys have to have a week to build this thing, then I have today to design it. So if I'm doing constant research and regular research, then hopefully I'm informed enough to kind of make a good decision in that moment when I am pressured to do it. But I think it is important. It's just, it can be very hard to do. It can be very hard to get that sort of, ask for that time to do the research, right? I think that's the biggest pushback is well, that's going to take time. That's going to take a week. And it's when people see something like this swipe example that I was talking about, when they see that people really don't want it and they were ready to go build it, when you do a research project like that, I think it's really great to share that with stakeholders, because then the next time you ask to do research, you're kind of saying here's this other time when we saved a ton of money and the thing we built was right. And then they're maybe more willing to give you the time to do the research up front that you need to do.
Totally. I love that. I love the idea of iterative research too. And I think that's what's kind of saving you from making those costly design mistakes. The research might take a little longer, but that could save you from a very costly mistake down the line. Yeah, exactly. Yep, exactly. Just what you're saying, Carolyn. I agree. John loves your Dirty Martin shirt. I know, save them. They also have amazing milkshakes. That was my favorite thing to get there.
I loved the milkshakes when I was there.
Any other questions, friends? I'm going to give y'all, okay, looks like we've got one from Craig. You can feel free to come off mute, Craig.
Hey, so if we're going to go with the it depends answer, does that mean when you look at a designer's portfolio, it just doesn't really mean a whole lot to you? Or how do you evaluate that the role of a designer's portfolio is just somewhat less to you? Is that a fair takeaway?
I wouldn't say that, because I would think that in your portfolio, I would be able to see some sort of sense of who you were designing that for, right? I mean, if you were designing, you know, for like a medical device company and you're using Comic Sans, I would think that was a poor choice, right? Something like that. But I think in most portfolios, you can get a sense of who the user is that they were designing for. And a lot of times like the goal that they were trying to achieve. And it can also be nice to really like include that in your portfolio. You know, if you're kind of new to UX, you can actually, the guy I mentioned, Jared Spool, has a really great like tweet thread. It's probably from like 2 years ago about like what to include in your portfolio. And it's got some really great tips on just kind of providing that context. So when I'm looking at your portfolio, I'm not just looking at a GIF of a cool animated drop down navigation, right? And I think that's like, if people that know me know that like I kind of have like dribble is one of my sort of pet peeves, because there's just like no context. There's just like a bunch of like stuff and some of it looks really cool. And I'm just like, but like, who is it for, right? So I think in your portfolio, you should be able to share that context of like, this is who I designed this for, or maybe we can tell by looking, right? If you're, you know, if you're designing like the Dirty Martins website, we kind of know who that's for, right? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that helps. Thank you.
Sure.
Awesome. Any other questions? Yeah, agreed, Melissa. Absolutely. Accessibility best practices in portfolio too. And I think, yeah, I agree. That's part of a successful portfolio, is kind of talking about the context. So the person who's looking at it understands, you know, the full scope of exactly what this project was for, who you were designing for. Yeah. All right, friends, if we don't have any more questions, then I think I am gonna wrap us up. Let's give a little snap for Christine. Thank you so much for being here tonight, Christine. Super, super interesting stuff. I thought that was a really awesome topic. We will be sending out a follow-up email tomorrow to all of you attendees, so you guys can have the recording and just some information about it. Just to remind you what we learned tonight. And then hopefully if y'all are local Austinites, you can make it out to our in-person social tomorrow, 5 to 7 at Central Machine Works. But I think that is it for tonight. So thank you guys so much for joining us. And yeah, y'all have a lovely rest of your Thursday evening.
Oh, thank you so much, Christine. We really appreciate you coming.
Thank
Good
you all.
stuff.
Great being here. Thanks so much. Everyone have a great weekend.
Yeah, you too.
All right.
Thank you.
One
Bye,
quick
guys.
question. Are you in UXPA Boston?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I got to come out to your conference in the fall. I love that group. Wish I was in Boston to be part of it. It's so good.
We're pretty spoiled. We have UXPA Boston, which is amazing, and that conference is wonderful. They also put on a UXPA fair every spring, which is more geared towards like new to UX and UX career changers. So that's a really awesome just one day event. And then we have Ladies at UX Boston and Boston Chi. So we're pretty spoiled. And like Jared Spool lives here, Steve Krug lives here, and we have, you know, 10 different universities with UX programs. So it's a wonderful community to be a part of. But I love that you guys are doing this in Austin, and that's, I'm always looking for different meetups, because everyone's kind of knowledge share, I think, is really important, that we, you know, kind of cross-pollinate all these little pods of UXers out there.
Yeah, totally agree. And then also Boston is awesome. I would probably move there.
I mean, I did. Austin was great. I was like, okay, I want everything that I have in Austin, but I do also want more. So, you know, it was like my checklist was like, you know, lots of cool restaurants, good live music, all of the things. But then like, I also wanted, you know, 4 seasons out of the year. Like we're having spring right now. Have you guys heard of that one? It's really cool.
We have
do
it for
spring.
like 2 weeks. That's
Yeah,
about how long
yeah,
we have it.
Yeah. So yeah, I've been up here a little over 10 years. It's great. But I usually, this last weekend was just like the hot rod show. And I used to go down every year for that. My brother still lives in the Austin area. Like all my family's still in Texas. So I'm usually down in Austin once or twice a year.
We can't tell that you're from here because you've picked up a nice Boston accent.
That's
just to let you know.
It's, you know, it happens. It happens.
Well, thank you again. We'll let you go, and I'm going to take my students back to class. So I'm going to close out.
Have a wonderful
Zoom.
night, everyone. Thanks so much.
Bye,
Good
guys.
night.